It's time for some exercises on events and modifiers. For the first exercise, the task is to update a data property of your choice every time the keyUp event is fired on the input field, and to also output the value of this data property. As a small hint, you can access the value of the input field on JavaScript's native event object by accessing the value property within the target object. Exercise number 2 is about updating the data property from the first exercise, but only doing so when pressing the Ctrl and Enter keys simultaneously. Notice that the modifier key for the control key is named CTRL. In the last exercise, you should prevent the form from submitting when clicking the Submit button. Essentially, this means to stop the submit event on the form from firing. Pause the video and give it a shot, and I'll be back with my solutions in a moment. Alright, I hope you were able to solve the exercises if you gave it a go. To solve the two first exercises, I need to add a data property that will hold the data that will be entered into the text input field. I'll just call it name in this example. So I'll add the data object and a name property, and I'll just initialize it to an empty string. And I'll use string interpolation to output its value up here in the first exercise. So I'll say name here, and I can do the same for the second exercise as well. With this property in place, I'm ready to update it as I type something in the input field. For this, I will listen to the keyUp event and use the v.on directive as we saw previously. So I'll just enter v-on here, which is the name of the directive, and a colon, and then the event name, which is going to be keyUp in this case, equals, and then we're ready to enter an expression. I'll implement a simple method which takes the native JavaScript event object as an argument. So I'll go down to the Vue instance, create a methods object, and I'll just name this name keyUp just to keep it somewhat descriptive. And I'll add the event object as a parameter. And in here I'll say this.name equals events.target.value. So remember that I have to use this to access the data property from within this method. Also note that I can access the input field's value on the event object by using the target object and then the value property on this object. This is plain JavaScript and has nothing to do with vue.js. Vue.js just takes care of providing us with this object. Now I just need to add the method name as my expression in the template and I should be good to go. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll write name keyUp here. Let's go ahead and test it and verify that what I enter in the first field is output next to it. Seems like it's working, so that's awesome. And actually that was exercise number 1, so let's move on to the second one. So in the second exercise, we need to do the same thing, except only updating the data property when we press the Ctrl and Enter keys simultaneously. For the first part, the solution from the first exercise was simple, but actually there's a better way. Remember that we can embed a single expression within the directive in the template. Actually, we can use that for assigning the value to the data property right there, instead of doing so within a method. So let's just prepare the template with the v.on directive and the keyUp event. So most of the markup is going to be the same, as you can see. I'll still use the keyUp event and the v.on directive, but the expression is going to contain the assignment directly. In here, I should not prefix the data property name by this. So I can write name equals $event. Remember that this is a special variable in the template. .target.value. So almost the same as we did in the method before. So the $event object gives us access to the native JavaScript object. directly within the template. And the rest is exactly what I did in the first exercise. As you can see, this approach eliminates the need to implement a method just for running a single statement. It does, however, come at the cost of having a little bit of JavaScript logic within the template, but since it's only a single statement or expression, I think that is not too bad. In fact, I personally prefer this approach over the other one, but I wanted to show both of them to you, so you can choose which one you prefer yourself. Let's just verify that this approach does the same thing as the other one. So I'll run the code again, and I'll enter something in the second input field, and indeed it seems to be working. Alright, but we're not done with this exercise yet. We still need to only update the name property, only if we press the Ctrl and Enter keys simultaneously. For that, we'll use the ctrl modifier key and the Enter key modifier. So let's do that right here. I'll say .ctrl for the modifier key and .enter for the key modifier. And that should be all I need to do. So let's run the code again. And I'll write something in the second input field and notice that nothing is updated as I write. But now if I press Ctrl Enter, we can see that the name property is updated. So that's a success. For the last exercise, I'll simply use the prevent modifier on the submit event on the form elements. So let's add a v_on directive here on the submit event. And I simply want to prevent this event from firing. So in this case, I actually don't need an expression. Note that the v_on's expression is optional, and in this case, we didn't need any. Also remember that the prevent modifier is the same as calling event.preventDefault on the native JavaScript event object. Also, note that I added the directive to the form element and not the submit element, because the submit event is triggered on the form element whenever the submit button is clicked. So let's just verify that it works. So if I click the submit button here, we'll see that nothing happens. And this shows that our code is working, because otherwise the page would be refreshed. Note that another solution could be to prevent the click event from being triggered on the submit button. However, you would typically want to do something when the user clicks the button, but just want to disable the default browser action. A common example of this would be to submit an AJAX request without reloading the page as a result of submitting the form. Also, by preventing the submit events, you also prevent the form from being submitted somehow else, such as when pressing the Enter key in a text input, for example. And that's just something to keep in mind, and that's why I prefer this approach, but the other one would indeed work as well. So, those were my solutions to the exercises. In the next lecture, we'll be looking at something called two-way data binding. So, see you there.